economics. And so, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Oh, okay. Oh, yes. Oh. So, I am very grateful to Roma Tre for this opportunity, which unfortunately comes out of something that was not expected, that Professor Fada was not able for health reasons to give this lecture. So I've been engaged in the very last minute, and I try to do my best. I would like to say something about the relationship between welfare state and full employment, something that is in the middle between constitution, political constitution, and economics. Now, the birth of the welfare state can be traced back to the work of German economist and socialist of the chair, Adolf Wagner. He was influenced by Ferdinand Lassalle. He was quite a relevant figure for German socialism. And like him, he was a Bismarck ally. Both found in Bismarck a political opportunity to give some example of their ideas. Now, he, from 1882 to 1885, was a member of the Prussian Diet. And there, in addition to the nationalization of the railways, he supported the establishment of social insurances and other welfare institutions targeted to workers and their families. Under his inspiration, Bismarck, who was moved more by his conflict with the Social Democratic Party than by passion for the social cause. Anyways, he established between 1881 and 1889 the first modern welfare system, which served as a model for all the other socially advanced countries. Health insurance, and then accident insurance, and retirement pension. And so the foundations of the modern welfare state was laid down on the European continent for the first time. It must be added, and this is quite important from the economic point of view, that the German economist Adolf Wagner is famous for having understood since 1878, quite a long time ago, that in modern economies, the growth of public spending was destined to exceed that of income. The accuracy of the simple prediction, which goes on by the name of Wagner's law, appears even more significant and profound when one thinks that it could not, at any rate, be based on the observation of coeval government behavior. Governments, in accordance with the prescription of the classical economy, in that age, finance with very limited resources. Madison estimates around 2% of income, only the traditional functions of defense, justice, and public order. Instead, the idea of the Wagner's law arose from the intuition that both the needs to promote industrial development and to contain social conflict that in large part was due to industrial development converged in inducing modern states to intervene to an increasing and unprecedented extent in the economic and social system. About 40 years later, the English economist Arthur Pigou, who succeeded in the Cambridge chair of his master Alfred Marshall, founded the welfare economy, showing that the economic well-being of the community depends not only on the growth of national income, but also on its distribution among individuals. Given a decreasing utility of income, an increase in real income determines an increase in welfare for society only if there is no redistribution to the detriment of the poor. If the economy increases the income of a rich man but reduces at the same time that of a poor man, there may in fact be a decrease in the welfare of the whole community, since the increase in the welfare of the rich will be significantly less than the severe loss of utility suffered by the poor, who is forced to live on met priority needs. A few years later, in the period following the great crash of '29, Roosevelt and Keynes, on both sides of the Atlantic and in the different areas of politics and economics, will converge in identifying public spending not only as a relief to the problems of economic and social deprivation, but also as an engine for economic revival after the crisis. They will also formulate on a new basis the political objective of full employment, and with it the unavoidable role of public intervention in a situation where market forces left to themselves proved far from being able to achieve it. In this intellectual climate, and with an eye to the conversion of the British economy from the war to peace, with the threat of unemployment that was advanced by the demobilization of the armed forces and the productive activities necessary to sustain the war effort, we find, about a decade later, the two fundamental works of William Beveridge, his report in 1942 and his plan in 1944. Tools for designing and programming a new social order inspired by the welfare economy of Pigou and the ideas of Keynes, aimed at supporting the effort of Great Britain in the conflict that was still going on, as well in the subsequent reconstruction of the country. Beveridge proposed a broad social support scheme for the population against the threat of the five giant evils: want, caused by poverty; disease; ignorance; squalor, caused by the misery of housing; squalor, caused by the misery of housing; idleness, caused by lack of jobs or inability to get a job. To break the giant ills, the plan included measures from the cradle to the grave, such as marriage and maternity benefits, allowances for young children, universal health care, pensions and disability benefits, unemployment benefits, allowances for widows, old age pensions, occupational pensions, and even funeral benefits. Submitted to the British Parliament on 1944, the plan was approved and in several stages since 1945. The plan is probably the largest survey ever made on the causes of unemployment and the possibility of full employment upon the return of peace. Full employment is identified in achieving a frictional unemployment rate of 3%, consisting essentially of employed workers looking for better employment. That is, more vacancies than unemployed people. And the welfare model designed by Beveridge is anyhow universal and focused on supporting the family, a family with two kids, with two children, and society. Full productive employment in a free society, writes Beveridge in the introduction of the plan, is possible, but it cannot be achieved by waving a financial magic wand. It's a social process, social and political process. In the field of economic theory, in those same years, Frank Knight, one of the founding fathers of the Chicago School, notes that the improvement of an economy's stock of productive knowledge could neutralize the law of decreasing returns. For Knight, the stock of productive skills and knowledge embedded in individuals can be considered a specific articulation of the capital of the economy, and thus be defined as human capital. If capital is the source of current and future flows of output and income, similarly, investment in human capital gives rise to a return which consists in the present and future improvement of the productive abilities of human beings and their income possibilities, as well as the efficiency of their economic decisions. This strand of investigation will be corroborated by empirical evidence in the 60s and the 70s, when adequate statistical information will be provided on the investments made by governments to improve education, health, and social security of the population, tracing the causes of economic growth by using aggregate production functions. The famous growth accounting showed that conventional measures of the aggregate product grew faster than aggregate measure of the amount of labor and capital employed. The residual component of growth, not explained by the quantities employed in the production process, was attributed to total factor productivity, a magnitude that cannot be ascribed to the quantitative growth of neither the labor nor the capital used. It was therefore suggested that total productivity was the result of technical progress of the productive system, a substantial part of which would derive from improvements in the quality of the factors themselves in labor. In this analytical scenario, the improvement of the productive capacity of labor was explained by a broad theorization of the concept of human capital, which came to understand both the long-term improvements in workers' abilities through the development of literacy, education, and vocational training, and other aspects leading to socioeconomic welfare and living condition of the population, such as lowering infant mortality, increasing resources for children, improving the health and the longevity of adults, and the ability of more educated people to make better economic choices. Empirical analysis showed that the return on investment in human capital was fully comparable in size to that of physical capital. The concept of human capital, considered in this broad and macroeconomic sense, offered scientific support to the governments that, driven by the example of beverages Britain, wanted to develop essential elements of the welfare state. The construction of the Italian welfare state follows, though, a different path. In 1948, with the end of fascism, war, and monarchy, the Republic establishes in the Constitution an inseparable link between two long-term projects, a political and a social one. That link places a strong constraint on the direction of economic policy that cannot but be reflected in the objectives of social policy. Already in Article 1, which attributes to labor the role of foundation of the Republic, and with Article 4, which, in evident parallelism with the vote, specifies employment both as a right and as a duty, the Constitutional Charter moves in direction of making full employment the backbone of the material constitution. The statement that the Republic recognizes the right to work and promotes the conditions that make this right effective entrusts public intervention with the task of promoting economic and social security policies that prevent the recurrence of depression and involuntary unemployment equilibria that, in the Great Depression, market forces proved they could create. But the innovative vision that characterizes the Italian Constitution goes further when, from the point of view of the material protection of citizen equality and freedom, It proclaims in Article 3 that it is the task of the Republic to remove the obstacles that prevent the full development of the human person and the effective participation of all workers in the political, economic, and social organization of the country. Here, employment is identified not only as both a right and a duty of citizens, but also as a fundamental condition of his freedom and of equality among citizens as well. Moreover, freedom and equality are understood in concrete, substantial terms and not as abstract rights, as undenied potentials. In fact, they must be realized for the individual in the full development of his human person, as much as for the community in the effective participation of all workers in the political, economic, and social organization of the country. The vision of the effective enjoyment of citizen workers' citizen workers together, the same, rights of freedom and equality in terms of personal development and full collective participation in the life of the Republic is a political element of considerable importance of the Italian Constitution that strongly qualifies the model of democracy and welfare state it seeks to found. In nuce, it can be considered that it represents an archetypal model of that substantive freedom which later on Amartya Sen, perhaps influenced by his wife Eva Colorni, maybe, will develop with Martha Nussbaum in terms of a theory of justice and human development that moves from entitlements to reach the capabilities and finally the effective functioning of the rights along the path that from the formal law invests the ability to enjoy and then the actual enjoyment of rights. So we can say that full employment is a sort of a cornerstone of the Italian Constitution, but this does not mean that Italy has always been capable of warranting this cornerstone to all citizens. In 1963, after the post-war reconstruction phase, Italy finally reached a 4% unemployment rate, but in the following years and until 1997, unemployment rose rapidly up to 11.5% and then back to 6.2% in 2006, a new minimum. And then again from 2012 to 2019 back to values above two figures. However, from an international perspective, it should be noted that full employment is not a difficult objective just for Italy. Although at lower levels, after the glorious 30 of post-war reconstruction, practically all advanced economies are plagued by high unemployment and a slowdown in growth rates accompanied by high inflation, a disease of economic unexpected by theory, for which the name of stagflation has been coined in the 70s. The key instrument for coping with stagflation and ensuring a non-inflationary growth rate was then identified in a restrictive monetary policy. The monetarists' choice was based on the hypothesis that the interest rate regulated investments and the latter regulated unemployment, with which in turn regulated wages and consumption, and therefore inflation, according to the relationship between unemployment and inflation highlighted by William Phillips in 1958. In an inflationary situation, an increase in the interest rate would make it more expensive for companies to access credit and thus slow down growth. The slowdown would fuel unemployment, which in turn would contain wage claims and consumer demand, and finally curb prices. The main culprit of stagflation was therefore implicitly identified precisely in the full employment target pursued by the developed economies. That goal hindered the containment of wages and the demand for consumer goods needed to accommodate energy and commodity price shocks. In other words, politics tended more or less explicitly to charge stagflation against the power excess gained by labor in previous years, and therefore against the left-wing parties, trade unions, and the welfare states, whose connection with imported inflation is rather questionable. On the opposite shore of the Atlantic, a new pair of protagonists, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, faced stagflation with economic policies that reduced the social and economic regulation role of the state, tax cuts for the rich and for businesses, dismantling of the welfare state, and public intervention in the economy, liberalization of private finance, elimination of the constraints on the actions of banks and businesses, abolition of the rules of union protections. Once abandoned, the political objective of full employment was replaced by the much more cautious and highly technical attempt to reach the NAIRU, the not accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, the natural rate of unemployment high enough to prevent, in the conditions given to each economy, the increase in prices. This inflation relied primarily on the so-called supply-side policies, as opposed to Keynesian demand-side policies. In a context of money supply restriction and austerity policies, the political centrality of full employment was replaced by that of free market and enterprise, and by the stability of the currency, encouraging almost everywhere not only the increase in unemployment and the compression of the labor share in income, but also the impoverishment of the middle class and the rapid growth of economic and social inequalities, which over time will prove unprecedented. As we have seen, between the second half of the 70s and the early 80s, the slowdown in economic growth and the automatic increase in the tax burden made possible by the coexistence of inflation and progressive rates, combined with deep-seated expectation for the development of public services, in an explosive mix of acceleration, ended in an explosive mix of acceleration of Wagner's law. The crisis did not delay in posing pressing problems of adjustments to citizens and policymakers, of economies that, unlike Italy, does not discharge on public debt the growing financial needs. Italy, thanks to the explosion of a previously modest public debt, allowed itself a delay of almost a decade. With stagflation, Wagner's law took the threatening form of the tax burden reaching a critical threshold of such a magnitude as to discourage private investment. It thus found a new theoretical formulation, more comprehensive and maybe more suggestive, in the framework of the famous as well as discussed Laffer curve. The hypothesis underlying the theory is that at the same income, there is a maximum amount of public goods that the government can provide to the population. If the level of taxes is such as to discourage the commitment to work of individuals and the investment of companies, there will be not only a lower level of consumption of private goods, but also a lower level of tax revenue and therefore public expenditure. Overspending would generate economic stagnation and erode the sustainability of the same level of public spending achieved. In other words, not unlike the relationship between employment and inflation, there would also be a level of natural or equilibrium taxation, a point where Wagner's law should stop, because there would reach their maximum not only the production and consumption of private goods, otherwise discouraged by taxation, but also with them tax revenue, the level of public expenditure, and thus the ability of public goods to provide the population. The availability of public goods to the population. The Laffer curve is one of the foundation of the supply-side economics. To combat the disincentive effect of economic initiative related to excessive public spending, especially in terms of resources absorbed by the public sector crowding out private investment, the supply-side economics invokes important cuts of the tax pressure. The reduction in taxes should be accompanied by a slowdown in public spending so to contain public debt, allowing the release of more resources to the private sector. The reduction of the tax burden would favor economic activity, and this way would also allow for an increase in the absolute value of tax revenue and therefore of public expenditure itself. As a matter of fact, the risk of unsustainable tax growth had been reported since 1977 in terms of the fiscal crisis of the states by James O'Connor. I don't spend more time talking of this, but I would like to say that at the end of this hints, just hints on the passage from Wagner's law to Laffer's curve, it must be said that despite the relevant political appeal of the hypothesis that supports the latter, reproposed in recent times and with some adjustments derived from the rational expectation theory in support of the even more daring theory of expansive austerity, there is a link between the two. No empirical verification is available to date to confirm its validity in relation to the prevailing levels of tax burden. Moreover, the fight against stagflation through the combined use of restrictive monetary policies and a more flexible labor market has been less successful than expected for all the countries that have taken this path. In the second half of the 90s, the average inflation in the OECD countries finally appeared under control, around 2%. But unemployment fell below 6% only a decade later, shortly before the international financial crisis of 2008, which in 3 years brought it back to 80.5%. And economic growth, which between 1960 and 1973 averaged 5.1% a year, in the subsequent period up to 2000 halved to 2.8 a year and did not come back ever since. The combination of restrictive monetary policies, neoliberalism, social restraint, and equilibrium unemployment, if it has therefore curbed inflation, has failed to restore both growth and employment. And the abandonment of the full employment goal in favor of an equilibrium unemployment and the flexibility of the labor market has led the advanced economies to a stalemate for a reason as simple as difficult to accept for those who rely on the neoliberal state of mind. Without full employment, there is not even growth. This because, as both Keynes and Beveridge well knew, between full employment and domestic demand, net of public spending and imports, there is a strong link, a link that for developed economies where starvation wages do not prevail, cannot be replaced by global demand, not by finance. The economic problem that the refoundation of the welfare state must solve is therefore how to succeed in having, in an economy not led by command, a situation of full employment without inflation and without poverty. If full employment is an indispensable political and social objective in order to regain it in the new conditions of the globalized economy and in the face of the fourth industrial revolution, work must change. It must become more qualified and more productive. But at the same time, the cost of labor for the enterprise must become more flexible, so to facilitate the continuous reorganization of the production system. However, the paradigm of work flexibility can be declined in different directions, according to different possible functional equivalents, each one involving specific costs and benefits. The fundamental dimensions of flexibility are three: that of labor relations, that of working time, that of wages. The latter, the most difficult, is, however, also the most promising. The flexibility of wages requires consciously pursuing a far-reaching social transformation, opening up a reorganization of the welfare state that does not penalize work, but rather enhances cooperation between the state, capital, and labor. Many are the examples of more or less limited forms of flexible pay, from large Japanese companies to cooperatives in central Italy. But the only proposal for an economic system based on a general wage flexibility is contained in the work Full Employment Regained by James Mead, the English economist, friend of Keynes, author of Agathotopia, and Nobel laureate in 1977. The fundamental point of the median proposal is that as the acceptance of a flexible wage leads ipso facto to labor taking the risk of undertaking, it can be accepted only as a result of a profound change in the traditional employment relationship and a parallel cultural evolution of social relations. By agreeing to adjust their remuneration to the performance of the company, workers become partners, partners who invest in the company their work on par with those who invest their money. But it is also clear that in order to protect household income and develop the economy, the abandonment of a stable income from work must necessarily be coped with other incomes going to labor. Mead intends to strengthen the complementarity between the spreading of equity ownership and the social sustainability of highly flexible wages in order to preserve their semantic purity as a useful market signal to guide the optimal allocation of labor and capital in an economic system that technological progress and the changing condition of global markets makes subject to continuous profound transformations. The social partnership model proposed by Mead provides that both workers and shareholders have shares of the company, but with distinct characteristics. Labor shares are entitled to dividends to the same extent as normal capital shares, but being linked to the work carried out in the enterprise, they are non-transferable and cancel themselves when the worker voluntarily leaves the enterprise. Labor is therefore remunerated partly by a fixed wage, partly by dividends from the shares, which it retains even in the event of involuntary unemployment. Despite the variety of possible balances between capital and labor in individual companies, the result must nevertheless be such as to ensure that the workers have a decisive influence on the company structure. The level of wages and the degree of their integration with capital gains by labor share is a measure of the need for public income support and employment protection programs. A flexible worker partner will never lose its job unless the company is forced to close, but will be able to choose whether to remain in the company in which it works or to try to change job when its remuneration or the value of its shares reaches a level that it does not deem appropriate. The income guarantee proposed by Mead consists in the progressive integration of all incomes through an additional type of income, the social dividend. This third item, universal and not subject to any means testing, is financed by public participation of up to 50% in the capital of all companies through a process that Mead calls topsy-turvy nationalizations. The purpose of the income derived from the government's participation in enterprises is to gradually transform public debt into public credit, so to replace a large part of taxation and, above all, enable all citizens to enjoy in perpetuity an income equal for all and independent of work, a tangible fruit of social cooperation between the government, entrepreneurs, and workers in the good conduct of business and the economy. There is no doubt that such an indication requires a profound transformation of social and economic relations in the direction of clearly more integrated and cooperative national communities. But it has the advantage that it can be implemented gradually, without strong political, social, or economic shocks. Certainly, in many European countries, and also in Italy, there are already universal welfare programs which ensure a minimum income for citizens in condition of economic hardship, regardless of their present or past condition in the labor market. But Mead's conception is quite different in that it is not based on welfare motives, but on the desire to highlight and make available to all citizens the fruits, the material fruits, I should say, of social cooperation, while at the same time cleaning the remuneration of labor from any inflationary risk as well as from any redistributive function. The social dividend proposal also sketches a new model of the welfare state that relaunches in innovative terms the traditional Keynesian role of the public operator supporting economic and employment growth. The minority shareholder state transforms the relationship between economic growth and the welfare state, today in crisis, giving life to a social protection system that, instead of opposing itself as corrective to the development of production and income, is totally connatural with it. Moreover, while the availability for the economic system of a substantial public credit cannot but positively affect the capital market and the level of the interest rate, therefore easing the creation of new activities, the explicit link between public participation in production and the level of the social dividend constitutes a new and richer material element of citizenship and social solidarity. This decided heretic character of Mead's strategy as compared to the traditional schools of economic thought, and perhaps for this reason more suggestive, at least in my eyes, consists in the intellectual freedom with which it combines in an unprecedented unified perspective some basic elements of the opposing neoclassical and Keynesian traditions. Flexible labor remuneration, low inflation, control of the money supply, and market competition are combined with highly redistributive fiscal policies, diffusion of the participatory model in the company, increase instead of a reduction of the public's presence in the economy, but tied not to interfering with the market logics, resumption of the Keynesian demand management, and above all, of the goal of full employment. It should also be noted that, although not explicitly addressed to this objective, the median proposal offers theoretically a solution to the serious structural problem that we have seen undermine the possibility of continuing the development of the welfare state as we have known it so far. Its solution to the problem posed to the threatening advance of Wagner's law and the consequent perverse effects of the tax burden on growth is to relax and to limit to severe the historical link between growth in social expenditure and growth in taxation. In Mead's model, It is the measure of the social dividend, that is the flow of interest on public capital invested in private enterprises, that determines to what extent social expenditure should be financed through taxes. If the flow of public capital dividends is substantial, social spending will also increase if the tax burden is eased. Meanwhile, the nature of the social dividend ensures a new virtuous link between economic growth and growth in public spending. This does not imply that public expenditure can grow without a limit, but it highlights that the limit rests in the revenues of public minority participation in enterprises. That, in turn, the revenues of public participation depend on the economic growth. So the English economist's proposal reduce also the structural problem of unbalanced growth between the progressive and the stagnant sector of the economy, the so-called Baumol disease. In a situation where labor costs are sufficiently flexible to adapt to the differential evolution of both productivity and labor demand between enterprises and industries, wage differentiation can counteract the risk of jobless growth, while the socially undesirable effects of widening wage differential meet a correction on the tax and social dividend sides. It remains, of course, to be seen whether in the practice or word adopting Mead's proposal, wage differential could not create a squeeze on labor supply because of too pronounced a redistribution of income from wages and work shares to public transfers. In terms of job search theory, in fact, redistribution could lead to a corresponding increase in reservation wages, with multiplicative effect on fictional and wage unemployment. In a reality in which the remuneration directly linked to work were locked at unattractive levels in certain industries. But as we said before, it should be noted that a particular merit of Mead's proposal is the gradualness with which it can be applied. So the different measures have reciprocal, mainly financial constraints, but that does not seem to be a minimum threshold of effectiveness below which expected virtuous effects would not occur. The menu allows for a gradual application. At the end of these excursions on the evolution of the welfare state and its unavoidable pivot, the full employment of productive forces, it is possible to attempt some conclusive consideration. The first and more general is that despite everything, it is not permissible to be too pessimistic about the future of the welfare state. In fact, although this complex political, social, and economic construction, which has characterized the 20th century in such a profound way, is today marked by lacerations linked to an evident, sometimes dramatic state of difficulty, the crisis has probably more the character of a tuning, a rethinking of a path too hastily, and especially in the last period, too automatically traveled than that of a failure without remedy. Important structural conditions have certainly changed. The degree of environmental competition has increased in relation to the rapid and tumultuous development of globalization, and with it the risk of a dangerous reduction in the levels of social solidarity reached by the advanced economy in the 70s. In the advanced economies, the tertiary and information sectors have consistently expanded, while manufacturing has been relocated to less developed areas, with the consequence that today advanced economies show great difficulty to pursue rhythms of growth that 50 years ago appeared completely normal. with the risk of losing the fundamental support for social cohesion offered by a rapid expansion of collective well-being. Above all, the great hope of being able to reach and maintain in time through the budgetary maneuvering a level of full employment of productive resources without inducing deep imbalances in the economic and social system seems to have fallen forever, a task that seems increasingly difficult for any economic system not regulated by command. Since its first statement, full employment in terms of the absence of involuntary unemployment became the essential objective of the welfare state. But in order to regain it in the present context, work, enterprises, and the welfare state itself must change, integrating each other into a new, more deeply participatory development model. In Mead's proposal, labor income derives from at least three different sources: wages, remuneration of work through work shares, and social dividend. The solidity of the enterprises is supported by the public participation in their capital and by the progressive abolition of taxes. And the state can minimize public debt and benefit from the public credit deriving from the minority participation in capital and of the enterprises. Each of these three social actors will then have interest in the mutual collaboration for a development that is at the same time economic and social. It cannot be without significant political implications. In these terms, we envisage a shift from a concept of social solidarity characterized in an essentially redistributive way to a new concept of productive solidarity, which supports the search for new equity criteria corresponding to a degree of social and economic development and commensurate with the realization of self-expressive and participatory needs of citizens. In this new sense of the welfare state, the social dividend is not a form of income guarantee as an alternative to employment, but on the one hand, a tangible measure of social development and cohesion available to all, and on the other, a necessary condition to allow everyone to develop their professionalism and therefore to encourage the development of the productive forces of the economy and the regaining of full employment in terms of absence of involuntary unemployment. Moving from full employment as a condition of the welfare state, the concrete productive solidarity proposed by Mead, and I should say always also envisaged in the Italian Constitution, outlines an economic and social transformation that identifies the new welfare state as a condition for full employment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tronti. I don't know if there is some question from the floor, because we have 10 minutes. So, Professor Zezza. Is here Luigi? Okay, speak there. Because I don't know how to do it.
Thank you. Much smaller scale without such and it has been attacked by violence
there are not many other questions, I could try to answer.
Yes. Okay.
Now, I think that you pose a very, very important problem on which I have not really made any consideration in my lecture. That is the political aspect. No, I just talked about the neoliberal state of mind, something like this, because I think that neoliberal vision of the economy is something that is not scientific. It's a state of mind, really. It's something that comes to push people to become all entrepreneurs of themselves, something pushing in a direction of freedom that is not linked in any real guide that assures this push towards a social, sustainable system, something that increases solidarity through the population, increases mutual help, and also freedom, because you know that, as my friend Schiattarella recently well expressed in his book on values in economics, the freedom value that is embedded in neoliberal state of mind is freedom for multinational enterprises. But freedom for multinational enterprises is not freedom of all citizens. It's something different. Already the 1778 chart well clear that freedom, personal freedom, ends where another person's freedom begins. And this is not exactly the concept that is behind neoliberal state of mind. So I think there is a strong problem, political problem. And I think that more than political, before than political, this is a cultural problem. There's a cultural problem that I would say has got to do something with the with what is the prevailing cultural values that are spread throughout. So the hegemony, something like, you know, the cultural hegemony. Who has got the cultural hegemony, and how is it waged, this cultural hegemony in society? You know? So I think that there should be some sort of a new cultural effort, or a new cultural in order that is able to create some new intentions in political parties, political groups. I think that I'm not totally pessimistic in that I think that some signs of this change is already there in the same Anglo-Saxon countries that were the first to embrace neoliberalism. So I think that there is something, you know, history is a sort of a pendulum that goes from one side to the other. And so I think that there is the chance, there is the possibility of changing state of mind, of having a more social state of mind. But it's something to be looked. I think that maybe the economist's duty is to provide an economic framework in which to pose, to cultivate this state of mind. But the cultural work and the economist work is not exactly the same. They may interfere, and they should interfere, but they are not exactly the same. So I think that I'm not sure I answered your question, but I think I would not like to answer it precisely, to say, yes, there is this party with these ideas, and this should assure us the possibility to have a new welfare state that can renew full employment in a different way. In a different way. Full employment in the median sense is different. It's not exactly the idea of full employment we have up to now.
I am perhaps more pessimistic than you, because I think that there are power relationship, and it is not only a problem of cultural hegemony. And this can also explain what you said about the shift from the golden age after the Second World War to the phase in which neoliberalism prevails. We have also another question, but we have very few minutes, so.
Okay, thank you. No, more than a question, I would like to take up the provocative question by Gennaro. And I would say that this also emerges from your talk, that I think that it's quite a difference between programs that are aimed at supporting people who are unemployed, like Reddito di Cittadinanza, or unable to be employed, and programs that point to keep the largest possible of people unemployed. That's quite different, because and the political sustainability of the two kinds of programs is quite different. I think that the political sustainability of programs that aim at enlarging as much as possible the level of employment, the number of people who are employed, are more politically palatable than programs that just aim at giving a universal income or reddito di cittadinanza. Because I think that it's easier to think of programs that keep people employed, either through specific social programs or through the kind of mechanisms that you presented in your talk, meets programs, etc., because they are related to productive forces. They are more consistent with the idea of keeping the economy alive and rising productivity, keeping people within the production process. So I think that it's quite a different kind of programs that should not be confused. And the former kind of programs have probably a higher political chance to be sustained by the larger spectrum of political forces.
Thank you. So, Leonello, a very quick answer. You have 1 minute. Okay, you can speak.
I have a very quick answer, but it's not yes. That is this one. As a matter of fact, in Italy, but I think almost everywhere in the advanced countries, the state government is supporting enterprises to a high extent. They are giving money to enterprises in order to have them change in the way that it's supposed to be politically useful, And what, from the political point of view, what if one day governments would say, yes, I give you this money, but I want shares of your company in exchange for that? It's a very simple thing. I should think not disruptive of anything, but to a certain extent, for the neoliberal state of mind, it's blasphemy. It's a blasphemy.
You have had the Madner plan in Sweden, but you know. Okay, thank you, Leonello, and we can stop here this keynote speech.